Bill Gates said, "I will always choose a lazy person to do a difficult job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." What's a real-life example of this? I knew a guy who had a low-level data/reporting job. He had several daily/weekly work responsibilities, including a bunch of reports that needed quite a bit of tweaking from raw data to finished product. But like I said, low level. We didn't find out until way later, but he had set up macros for each of his major responsibilities where he could. Once set up, he'd just run the macros to do his work, but then he'd, smartly, hold off on delivering the reports until just a little before the deadlines. He'd hit every assignment and was seen as reliable. He also would complain about the workload so people would leave him with that work. I doubt he did a full hour of work a day after he set up what he did. Eventually he left the job for one with better pay. But damn, did he work lazy. Also, he was smart not to reveal until the end, because had he told them about it he would have gotten a pat on the back and would have been given a whole other workload, on top of maintaining those macros/etc. Dude milked the job, not the other way around. My brother gave my oldest nephew $10 a week if he did all his chores without needing to be told or complaining. One day he gets home early from work and sees the neighbor kid tossing a bag in the trash. He asks him what he is doing and the kid says he gets $5 a week to take care of a few chores. My nephew outsourced his chores. An older company had a person dedicated to data entry, which boiled down to copying and pasting portions of data from text files into spreadsheet and formatting into a report. The person originally doing this job spent a full 40+ hours/week doing it, but was not very computer literate. When they retired, the company hired someone with actual skills. The new hire convinced management to let her work remotely after getting up to speed on the job. The first week at home was spent automating the entire job. The remainder of their multi-year tenure with the company was spent doing whatever they wanted, save the 10 to 15 minutes weekly to run their program and to answer the odd email here and there. All while getting paid full salary and benefits. They actually had to add in a few errors now and then to make it seem realistic. Years ago as a student I got a job stocking shelves. Guys were carrying the heavy boxes, put them on the floor and bend each time to pick up the items to put on the shelves. I was maybe a light 100 pounds, woman, and carrying the boxes was just killing me physically. So one day I had an idea. I put the box on an old desk chair and rolled it around. No more carrying and no more bending. Funny thing is that, instead of doing the same thing, most of the guys called me lazy and kept carrying the heavy boxes. Just to prove how strong they were. Now they have special rolling carts to do the job. Every year in the Canadian winter, power lines would fail due to the weight of the snow. It took many days to build up enough to break a line, so they employed a team to walk the routes and shake the poles to loosen the snow. One day they saw a bear shaking the poles and realized that if they could get the bear to do it they wouldn't need to walk the route. So they gave one guy a bucket of honey and he'd walk the route painting the sides of the poles with honey to attract the bears. It worked for a few more years, but this still takes a lot of time to do. So then they had the idea of flying a helicopter along the route with a trained sniper with honey paintballs that he'd shoot the poles with. On its maiden flight the helicopter passed the lines and the downdraft blew away all of the snow. The flights continue to this day but without the sniper. I was invited to my friend's yearly apple picking. It was a full day of apples and kids and filling a truck for cider. I'm lazy and suggested we make the process more efficient with tarps on the ground. We managed in 2 hours what historically took all day. We didn't even get to the picnic lunch. Essentially, I ruined apple picking. My ex-boss gave me an Excel sheet. 124.000 rows Excel sheet. Had all the company customer data per row, twice. In some of those duplicates there was an error. She needed me to go over the list one row by row to check for mistakes and mark all the faulty entries I could find. through 124.000 rows. She wanted me to do that using the arrow down key and my mouse. I thanked her. I sat down. Invested half an hour into Google. Copy-pasted some parts of this formula, then some parts of that. Finally I had figured out the formula. I double-clicked the tiny rectangles so that the formula gets applied on all rows. Worked like a charm. I stood up, got myself a coffee, talked to some colleagues. Then I went to my boss. She had anticipated that I would need 3 days for this task. When I was back less than an hour later, she thought I hadn't understood the task or maybe a follow-up question. I will never forget the expression on her face when I told her I was done. There were 6 faulty entries. The clerk was asked to bring 145 white papers into the office. He doesn't want to count the papers manually, so he printed 145 blank sheets and took them in. I don't know if this is a true story, but kind of fits your request. There was a manufacturing plant that made toothpaste. One year for some reason there ended up being an unusually high number of empty boxes being shipped out. So in order to stop that from happening, the head of the company hired a couple engineers to develop a system to catch any empty boxes so they didn't get shipped with the boxes that actually had the toothpaste tubes in them. The engineers developed a system that if the box weighed below a certain amount, the system would stop and a worker would have to go remove the box and start everything up again. The person in charge loved the idea and implemented it immediately. And right from the get-go the number of empty boxes shipped dropped to near zero. The head of the company wanted to go see the system in action, so he goes and visits the plant one day and notices a huge fan right by the assembly line. Very confused as it wasn't hot, he asked the plant manager why the fan was there. The plant manager said the workers were tired of stopping what they were doing to remove an empty box, so they just hooked up a fan to blow the empty boxes off the scale before the system recognized it was empty and shut everything off. So laziness led to a more efficient and cost-effective plan. The entire miscellaneous kitchen tools section at Bed, Bath & Beyond. I don't need an avocado slicer or a lemon squeezer or an automatic chopper/dicer, but lazy old me definitely puts them to good use. Well, I worked in a graphics design studio as an intern. They mostly had me practice and do some basic stuff their head designers was too busy to do. One was a real estate ad. It had a few basic templates, but it was all kinds of scatterbrained. I would spend 5 to 10 minutes trying to find the right layer for all the pictures, and had to mess with way too much. So I made copies of the files, and made one for each template. I labeled everything, made it so the images on top of each other wouldn't clip into the lower ones like the previous did. So on. You could be in and out of the template in 2 to 3 minutes. Showed my boss the difference, and he had this face of well shit. He said the next day that if I was a graduate he'd hire me, because I was better than the people sending applications in. In short, I made an overly complicated/unorganized thing the opposite, and my boss was actually sad he couldn't hire me. Worked as a laborer at a nursery one summer. Daily tasks included manually watering 15,000 plants each day. Put together a back-of-the-napkin plan to build an irrigation system and spent the next few weeks building it with some money from the boss. That system is still running 15 years later and does all the work now. I did automate myself out of the job and had to find another eventually. Couple years later got my engineering degree. I'm convinced engineers are inherently lazy people that will spend a disproportionate effort to make things easier. At work, I go through parts and apply 2 different kinds of tape and 2 different kinds of weave. I have finally got the rhythm down, and now I do each part individually, and apply everything at once. Everyone else goes through an entire order, just applying tape, then goes through it again to do the weave. I asked to use the big table in the back of the shop, and just put all the tape and weave tools there. And do the parts all at once. Normal rate for an 8-hour shift is 1,200, but I can manage 1,800 in a day, going at a nice steady pace. Edit, I can get 1800 going at a steady pace. I've done it before. But I usually don't. Most days I go slow and relax, purposely only making 1300 to 1350 or so parts. It's just enough overrate to get my incentive bonus. And, thanks to being a hard and fast worker, the uppers leave me alone at my big table in the back. They look the other way when I have an earbud in one ear, and they don't notice that I scroll Reddit or read a lot. When I was in college I had a job at an Italian fast food place with a reputation for its breadsticks. They came in frozen and needed a bit to thaw, so we'd take a giant 3x4 feet aluminum baking sheet, spread them out in a single layer with no spaces and cover it with a plastic bag, then leave it sit in the walk-in overnight. The next day you'd have to get a pair of tongs and move each stick to a new tray, turning them over, then cover the new tray with the bag and let them sit on racks for a couple of hours before brushing on the garlic butter sauce. This was tedious enough that you'd usually be ready to brush the butter on the first tray as soon as you turned the last tray. I was given this task for the first time one morning and just did not want to deal with it. I realized if I put the second tray upside down on top of the first one then turned it over and took the first tray out, I got exactly the same results. Blew the boss's mind when I did the 3-hour job in about 15 minutes. I was given a $0.05/hour raise.